Hello, I'm Eugenie Scott. I'm very honored to be your host tonight at Skeptical Inquiry Presents. Now, you will notice I am not your usual host because, and you may wonder why I am here. I'm here because 2025 is the 100th anniversary of the Scopes trial, and CSI is holding a conference in July of 2025 to commemorate the Scopes trial. And to commemorate another trial involving creationism and evolution, Kitzmiller versus Dover, which is having its 20th anniversary in 2025. In fact, one of the guest speakers at the Chattanooga conference is the judge for Kitzmiller, John E. Jones, who I would strongly recommend you seeing because he's really great. I was asked to host because I have some familiarity with the Kitzmiller versus Dover case. I wasn't around for Scopes, but I was around for Kitzmiller. The organization that I used to head before retirement, the National Center for Science Education, was intimately involved in the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial. We were working with citizens in the community of Dover. We helped assemble the legal team and we advised the legal team through the whole trial. So Kitzmiller is a very important trial to me personally and to the organization that I used to direct. One of the people appearing at the CSI Chattanooga conference is our guest tonight, the actor, playwright, author, documentarian, and general all-around creative person, John Lancie. A graduate of the Juilliard School, he has had a long career in stage, on television, and movies. We know him, we nerds, the skeptic community, know him best as playing the interdimensional character Q in several Star Trek series. But he has done much, much more in many other television series, as well as movies, stage plays, and has many voice actor credits as well. Now, I'm going to direct you to his IMDb page or even his Wikipedia page for a fuller list, because we do not have time to go through all of that. He's had a long interest in science and critical thinking. One of his credits is a series he developed with Leonard Nimoy called Alien Voices. It was a series of audiobooks based on famous science fiction by Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, classics like that. They are very hard to find, unfortunately. Now, I bring this up because the Alien Videos project reflected his and Nimoy's interest in radio plays. A radio play is sometimes described as theater for the mind because, like a book, your imagination has to do a lot of the work, which brings us to tonight's program. John has co-written a radio play based on the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial, which will be performed at the Chattanooga conference sponsored by CSI in July. John Lancie, welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm so happy to see you again. You know, in preparing this introduction, I discovered that you went to Dayton for the unveiling of the Clarence Darrow statue. Um, so you must have been interested in the Scopes trial for rather a while. What got you interested in the Scopes trial?
Well, when you reference the radio plays, doing radio plays, LA Theater Works,
Oh yeah, yeah.
good, so you know LA Theater, yeah, LA
I
Theater
know them, and I think I know where you're going with this.
said it put together a cast that
Mhm.
including myself and Ed Asner
Oh,
um,
fabulous.
to do the Scopes monkey trial, which was essentially transcripts with a
Mhm.
narrator who did the
Yeah,
interstitials and what have you.
yeah.
When we were doing it here, rehearsing it here in Los Angeles, I was thinking, well, this is very nice, but it's sort of historical, historical, pastoral. It didn't feel particularly current to me, and it was nice to do it. I played Darrow. Ed played William Jennings Bryan, and we did it in Los
Fearless
Angeles,
Brian.
and
Mhm.
we did it up in Berkeley, and then we did it, in Harvard and stuff like that. But when we got into the middle of the country, this show, which I thought of as being historical pastoral, was very current, very, very current. And my ears picked up at that point. And I was having conversations with people in the audience who felt, first of all, very emboldened, but also very impassioned about their young earth positions and a lot of things that scientifically I was not aware of, or I thought of as simply being kind of quaint and who really believes this type of stuff. That's how I got into this.
Mhm.
And so a number of years later, um, in looking back on the scopes, I discovered the Dover Intelligent Design, announced that I was going to do it, and very thankfully, a lady in the audience approached me after the performance of one of the scope trial shows and said, if you would like to have some help with the Dover Intelligent Design trial, I'd be delighted to help you. And that became my co-writer, Kristen Treager, and she was a PhD student in dramaturgy down at I think it was UC San Diego. So that's how we created the Dover Intelligent Design trial.
You got interested in the issue of creation and evolution because of the Scopes trial radio play that Ed Asner had put together, which I actually saw probably a decade before you did it, because he's been touring with this for quite a while. Um,
Well, no,
we
no, Ed and Ed, we did 3 years of it. And and we would go out for about 2 to 3 weeks each year. So where was it that you saw it?
Kansas.
In Kansas. I don't remember where in Kansas. Where
Well,
what?
what I remember, and we skeptics know that memory is fallible, right?
Yeah, yeah,
We're very good at admitting we
yeah,
might not be remembering this right.
yeah.
But what I remember is that there were a lot of problems. We had a lot at NCSE. We had a lot of problems with Kansas over the years. There were basically three series of evolution wars, where citizens of Kansas, with some support and help from us, but citizens of Kansas had to really push back against the state board of education, which kept trying to slip in first creationism, and then it actually tried to slip in intelligent design. This is
Wow.
before Kitzmiller. And then, when that started fading on the vine, well, we'll just teach the evidence against evolution, which is another thing we can talk about. But I remember this really wonderful LA Theater Works play. I thought it was with Ed Asner, but this would have,
I'm pretty sure it would be with Ed. Yes,
yeah, yeah,
definitely. Yeah,
because he was this fabulous Darrow.
yeah.
I mean, excuse me, fabulous Jip Bryan. And I
Uh,
mean, he was so good and jolly, and he was
yeah,
just
yeah,
great.
yeah, 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 absolutely.
You're much too tall for Darrow, but I could imagine you being a great Darrow.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, so what were the years that you were doing this?
Oh,
Um,
I don't remember anymore. I mean,
yeah,
I'd
well,
say
good.
it probably started about 20 years ago or so.
Okay, well, that's not too bad. All right,
Yeah,
whatever. But
yeah.
yes, it's a wonderful play, and if anybody gets a chance to hear it or see it, they should go to it. And they should also go to see your Dover play, because it is also very good. I had a chance to see that when you appeared at a Free Thought conference last fall in Sacramento. And it was very enjoyable for me to, well, it was very enjoyable for me to see a reenactment of the trial. But there's more than just the trial. So why don't, for the sake of all of those very many people watching this program who did not see it, tell us the setup, tell us the basic structure that you used to tell the story.
Well, what we did was
Where do you start?
well, I mean, the story is in 25 words or less is evangelicals took over the school board in Dover, Pennsylvania, tried to throw out the science book, the ninth grade science book, textbook, and insert intelligent design. That's the story. There were a lot of machinations in that process because there was a fair amount of pushback, and they essentially lied, cheated, and ultimately laundered money to do so. And
The
that
fun part of it. Mm.
and that all comes out in the trial. What Kristen and I did, was to follow the trial transcripts with inter.
Started before you gave the background before the trial. I mean, you didn't just leap into people sitting
No,
before a
no.
judge.
As I was going to say, there's a narrator who gives who
Right.
who gives us, begins with an overview and what have you, and we begin to move into the trial. We also have scenes of the parent conferences, the all of that took place, and we were very, very, very scrupulous about making sure that we wrote what you see is what people, when you come to hear it, this is what people said. This is
Mhm.
actually what people said. This is not like some pastiche that we put together. We wanted to make sure that the story told itself so that people can hear both sides. And there's some wonderful, wonderful characters. I mean, real people. Um,
Yes,
uh,
yes.
the uh, Ken, is it Ken Miller? Ken, I
Ken
think it is.
Miller. Yep.
Ken Miller, an extraordinarily entertaining explainer of
Mhm.
science.
Mhm.
And there are people in the community who got up and spoke, and they are represented as well. And
Yeah.
so it's it, it is a cautionary tale. It's a
Did you meet any of the witnesses in person?
I met Argento, who was the reporter at the time,
He's a
who's a very,
yeah,
very
he's
dry.
great.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
fun.
I've spoken with Jennifer Miller, who was the
Yeah.
young teacher, science teacher, all of a sudden found herself in the middle of all of this nonsense. So that's really as much as I went to Dover and drove around. It's a
Mhm.
tiny, tiny little
It's
place.
very big.
Truly a crossroad.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah.
That's it.
It,
Yeah.
it it is not unlovely. I mean, it's a reasonably attractive little area in Pennsylvania. There's nice hills and trees and stuff like that. It's, it's a people tell me it's a pleasant place to live. Um, I just wondered if you yeah, Jen Miller's great. I wondered whether there have been quite a few books written about Kitzmiller. I don't know if you consulted any of them in your
We did.
preparation.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we did. And also, I was given, I mean, after the show had been written and what have you, I was given the email for the judge. And I wrote him, it was set up that I was allowed to give him a call. And he wrote me a very, very nice letter. I sent him the play on a Sunday night, and said, if you could take the opportunity to read it, it would be great. He wrote me back immediately saying, yes, I will, but understand. He is the president, by the way, of Dickinson College. So he said,
He retired from the bench.
I'm very busy and I'm leaving for Europe or something like that. So
Right.
it will be a couple of weeks. And then I go to bed. I live in Los Angeles, and
Mhm.
he's on the East Coast. And I go to bed, and in the morning I woke up, and there was an email from him saying,
Mhm.
I was too fascinated to wait, so I read your show in during the lunch hour, and mostly what I got from him, which was important to me, he said, I feel that you have captured what took place in a very accurate way. So that was what I wanted to make sure took place. Yeah, that we got.
I felt the same way when I saw your play. I was not there for the entire trial, but I was there for most of it. And I, knew the characters and so forth. And I think you did a very credible job of capturing the soul, as it were, of Kitzmiller. When I was sitting in the audience, I was, Bertha Spar really doesn't look like that. Who cares? That's not the, that's just my being fussy. I wasn't complaining, believe me. But
Well, you
the
said something
important thing
to
was
me.
you get,
We
huh?
we only we spoke just for a moment or so
Yeah, yeah.
after the show, and you said something to me which also meant a great deal. You said you've managed to render a 40-day trial down to an hour and still hit all the high marks. I mean,
Thanks.
the thing is this, is that when you work on a piece like this, I used to be the host for the children's concerts for the LA Phil. And the question is, are you teaching them all, music history, or are you simply bringing them onto the bus to be
Mhm.
interested to find out later? That's what this exercise was about.
Yeah,
When Kristen and I wrote this, the idea was is that there are a lot of things that were said that are not included. Um, the issue is, however, to get people on the bus to be interested and go, oh, I now want to find out more.
yes,
And
yes,
and and then there is a way to find out more. As you mentioned, there are books out there. There are at least three books that I read that are very interesting, that really get down into the weeds. And if you want more than that, the transcripts are online, so you can
that's
really
right.
get more. But our job, I feel, was to get people interested about something which back in 2005 was sort of like, really, you took over a school board and flipped the school board and then started using the school board to get your ideas in, and that was, well, now it's done all the time.
Yeah.
Now it's just done all the time. But when I read about this, whatever it was, 8 years ago, I still found it to be like, wait, this is amazing. People need to know that this is happening. So
Mhm.
that's how
Yeah,
we.
the Kitzmiller trial was very widely covered. We had tons and tons of press actually at the courthouse there in Pennsylvania, and I mean it even showed up as a little piece of the Daily Show. Not very well done actually, but he didn't quite get it, but that's okay. But
Yes, did
and I think the
the thing
reason
on it.
for the reason for it was, as you were saying, it was this is still going on now and today. And I think that just underscores the bimodal distribution that we have in the United States, of we're in our own little silos. As the former director of NCSC, even though I live in Berkeley, I've never been in a Berkeley silo. Okay. I know a lot more about what people are thinking outside of the coast, outside of the big cities, because we dealt with school boards. We dealt with people who lived in small communities where school boards were making decisions that were really bad for science and bad for education in general, and bad for religion and government separation, which is another important feature. But yeah, I think it was. I think you're absolutely right. Your play is a wonderful introduction for people. If they want to know more, there's plenty. The NCSC website has all of the transcripts and an awful lot of commentary. I think Lori Lebo's book, The Devil in Dover, is probably if you read only one book, I would suggest reading Lori's. She was a reporter there. She was a colleague of Argento's at the York Daily Mail. I think that's the name of it. No longer, she doesn't work there anymore. But Lori's book is a very personal statement of her relationship with her family, which includes a whole ton of creationists, and she's not one. And her covering this trial for her newspaper as part of her job. And as she's listening to this, she's a very smart woman. She's not trained in science, but she knows how to think about stuff, which I think a lot of reporters do. They have analytical. The good ones have really analytical approaches to the topics. And she's saying that this doesn't make sense. This really doesn't. This intelligent design stuff doesn't sound like good science to me. And uh, she integrates what happened in the trial as somebody who lives in the community. She's the only one who wrote a book from the standpoint of somebody who, grew up in central Pennsylvania, lives just outside of Dover, worked there, had kids in the public school system, knew all the plaintiffs and so forth. So if you're going to just read one book on Dover, read Lori Lebo, Lebo, The Devil in Dover. It's very moving and also very informative. So
I,
that's my little pitch.
yeah, no, I agree. You have, when you have to organize these things, you have concentric circles. The first circle for us was the trial. The next circle out of that would have been what these board school board meetings were about. Very difficult to cover because, at least as far as we could see, there were never any minutes. So
Well,
we,
there were supposed to be tape recordings, and
yeah,
somehow
and,
tape recordings
right,
of specific meetings where creationism was brought up, somehow they couldn't find those.
right.
Amazing, wasn't it? Yes.
So we ended up constructing scenes out of that based on quotes from those reporters
Yeah,
who came in
yeah.
to do literal reporting, which is,
Mhm.
so and so said, and you could read it like that. So we were able to construct all that. Then the next level out, which Lori Lebo includes, which is really nice, but we don't
Right.
go that far because, first of all, we're not um, as we don't
Invested.
know as much as she
Right.
does about it.
Yeah.
We didn't live there. Is how the community, and in her case, her father, and the relationships there, and what have you. So it's a much more in-depth look at this
Yeah.
town through the trial and through the history of this sort of religious influence on science and education.
Yeah, actually the issue of the taking over the school board started slowly in 2022. Kind of the first anti-evolution issue showed up on NCSE's radar. And this was the burning of a mural that had been drawn by one of the students a few years previously. It was a mural, the sort of the classic marching hominids, which don't get me started. I'm an anthropologist by training, so there's some real problems with that. But you start off with the little thing that looks kind of like a cross between a monkey and an ape, and it gets more and more human
Right.
looking and so forth. Well, he did kind of a version of that, except they sort of all looked like Australopithecines running through the savannah, and they was, and of course they're the ape men, so of course they weren't wearing any clothes. And the custodian was just infuriated, refused to hang up the mural in the science classroom because he felt that it was not only anti-religious, but it was also pornographic. You can't have. I don't know if I can say this on the, but Lori quotes the custodian. His name was Larry Reeser, I believe it was. Quotes the custodian as saying, "You can see his schwang hang out." He did not like the fact that it was a naked male figure. So since his granddaughter was going to be starting school the following fall, during the summer, he just took the student mural off of the chalkboard, took it outside and set it on fire.
Yeah.
And nobody knew who did this for years. The teachers came in the fall and no mural. What had happened to it? Nobody knew. Nobody knew. And
Well,
later on, we
that's
found this.
that's how we start our show.
Mhm.
That was the flashpoint.
Yes, that
That
was
was
kind of the beginning of it all.
the beginning.
Yeah.
I happen to go back a little bit to when I did the Scopes Monkey trial with Asner, and I mentioned how, on both coasts it was just kind of a historical show, but when I got into the Midwest, it wasn't. I had an experience to add to my interest in this subject. I had an experience in Nebraska, in Lincoln, Nebraska. Um, we did the college circuit. So one college Ed would speak, and the next college I would speak, and it was my turn to go and speak to the drama students. And there were about 100 of them in the room. And for about an hour or so, I answered questions. And then at the end of the show, or at the end of that hour, the teacher said, by the way, how many of you saw the show last night? And only about 3 of them raised their hands. And he said, well, you really should. It's a fabulous cast, and it's on again tonight. So I encourage you to see the show tonight. Okay. And then he looked at me and he gave me sort of a look. And he said, with a show of hands, how many of you, the look was, let me show you what I'm dealing with here, and what you are dealing with, John. With a show of hands, how many of you believe that the world was created 4004 BC at, October 21st at 10 o'clock in the morning? And about 80 kids raised their hands. And I just kind of felt myself falling backwards. I had heard about this, but it just sort of took my breath away. And I remember my first thought was curiosity had left the room. 500 years of fabulous things that we have, as humans, have discovered and made clear to ourselves, had just simply left the room. And then I looked at him and he looked at me again, and he was like, okay. And then that night, when we were getting ready for the show, the entire cast, we were in the green room, and I told them this story. I told the cast this story. And we had a couple of students who had helped us the night before, costumes and bringing water bottles. And I mean, they were the Gophers, and they were very sweet kids. And I don't remember what her name was anymore, but, I'll call her Mary. I turned to Mary, with one of the kids, and I said, Mary, did you hear that story I just told? And she goes, yeah. I said, would you have raised your hand, Mary? And she said, oh, yes. I said, why is that, Mary? Why would you have raised your hand? She said, well, because God is my bus driver. And I said, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? It means that I can get onto my bus and go to the back of the bus and party hardy because I know that God is driving my bus. And I heard that as such an abdication of one's own personal responsibility in life that I went, oh my gosh, this is really serious. This is really serious. And I have often wondered 20 years later, where is Mary now? With that sort of thinking, where is Mary? Because that type of thinking is not going to help you be successful in life. And I met a number. I just did the show at Vanderbilt, and I met a number of students. And what was interesting to me is that I have done this show before, and I'm usually preaching to the choir. But here were a number of students who told me after the show, and we talked for about an hour. This was an audience who many of them recognized all of this. And one of them said, oh, yes, well, I had a science teacher in my school who said, you see this? This is the science book I'm supposed to teach from. And this is intelligent design. This is what we're going to do with the science book. And he threw the science book away, and he opened up intelligent design. I said, so let's just continue this conversation then. I said, I got it. I understand. So now you come to college. You've come to the university. What do you study, by the way? He said biology. I said, well, that's very interesting. What grade? What level at your are you at? I'm a senior. So when you arrived at university, having not been instructed in what the rest of the world understands, you were not competitive, were you? He goes, no, I wasn't competitive.
Yeah.
And I said, so what happened then? Well, he said, well, I had to cram about 4 or 5 years of instruction in biology education to get up to speed. I said, well, how do you feel about that? He said, betrayed, betrayed. And I have very close friends who grew up in the evangelical world, who are very successful now. I mean, one of them is my age, the other is the two that I'm thinking of is in his 40s, and they use that word a lot. And it's just sad to me because these are conversations that I remember having when we were doing the scopes thing. I was going, I don't understand. I would talk to the audience afterwards. I go, I don't understand. Why are you holding on to 4004 BC? I mean, Bishop Ussher, whatever it was, 400 years ago, smart guy,
Smart.
pre-science, tried to, I mean, scientists, for want of a better word, measure things. they're looking for measurements. They're trying to figure. So he was trying to figure out how old the world was.
It was a scholarly effort, and he was using the Bible as his source and combing through it and making charts and tables, and this relates to that and so forth. It was an incredibly, work heavy effort. But,
Absolutely.
it's what kind of bridle do you put on a unicorn? It's,
Yeah,
I
right.
mean,
But in 400 years, we've learned a lot more.
yeah.
And I remember
Which,
saying, you can have your God, who I dare say it should be clever enough to come up with evolution. At least I would like to think that you think that. Um, um, uh, but why are you putting this stake down in 4004 BC when, excuse me, other civilizations were actually already developing. So it's so strange to me, and I feel really badly. I felt badly for that kid. I said, listen, good for you that you are clever enough and smart enough and persistent enough to say, oh my gosh, I've got to cover who knows in the next 4 or 6 months I've got to really understand what's going on in biology and stuff like that, because otherwise, but most people are not that driven, and
people don't go to college either.
yeah, right.
And if you, we would make that point when we were defending evolution at NCSE. We would point out that, well, if you teach something like creation science or intelligent design, which is just really a subset of creation science, quite honestly, if you teach either of these kinds of creationisms, pretending they're science, kids are going to graduate from your high school. The smart ones will go on to college, and they will find that they had been lied to, whether a deliberate lie or just a falsehood that was promulgated over the years because people didn't know any better or didn't think about it. But they walk away with incorrect information and have to relearn what they should have learned, correct science, the first time around. And there was a sense of betrayal. People, what exactly as you describe has, I've had expressed to me as well. And I'm not a believer. I'm also not an anti-believer. I had to learn a lot about religion when I was working at NCSE, and I dealt with a lot of religious people, and I've learned a whole lot about the variation within Christianity that is found today. And the vast majority of Christians, the Christian denominations, Catholics, mainstream Protestants, etc., do not interpret the Bible literally. They made their peace with science generations ago, a century ago. The idea of using the Bible to explain the natural world makes no sense in an age of science. And any religion that is teaching that, revealed truth trumps empirical truth is ultimately going to lose. And unfortunately, when you give young people that choice, well, you can either have science or you can have the revealed truth of the Bible. You have to choose. The smart ones are going to give up their faith. And in my understanding of religion, it's really about purpose and meaning. It's not about why does water flow downhill. It's not about explaining the natural world. The vast majority of Christian theologians, certainly all of the ones I've ever dealt with, look at Genesis as being metaphorical, explains the relationship of humans of mankind to God. It doesn't tell you that snakes used to walk on four legs or talk. It's all analogical and metaphorical and is not to be taken literally. But there are those denominations that do take it literally, and those are the ones that we have trouble with when we have something like evolution in the public schools. And the craziest thing of all of it really is the idea that science itself is somehow a materialist philosophy, and that because evolution is so obviously incompatible with a literal interpretation of the Bible, therefore, science itself is atheistic. Well, it's atheistic in the sense that long division is atheistic. You don't need God to get it done. And that there's a big distinction. In fact, one of our very, very erudite, in my opinion, witnesses in Kitzmiller, the philosopher of science, Robert Pennock, said, I think even during the trial, that to say nothing of God is not to say that God is nothing. And Pennock himself is a believer. He's actually a Quaker and a practicing Quaker. So the fact that you don't bring God into scientific explanations doesn't mean that science is anti-religion or anti-God. And that's something that I think a lot of people have to get over on both sides of this issue,
Well,
whether
and
you're
that's one of the
religious or
things. Yeah,
secularist.
yeah, right. I agree with you, and that's one of the things that Judge Jones said
Mhm.
in his summary, that um, science does not preclude a belief in God, but intelligent design precludes a belief in science, and
Intelligent design requires a belief in
it
God.
requires a
Certainly does.
yeah.
I mean, all this, all for those of watching this who may not be familiar with intelligent design, because they're not making much of a fuss these days. Although I have reason to believe that they may be trying to gear up for another effort. But intelligent design was a subset of Christian Science, which was an effort to take the literal truth of Genesis and find scientific evidence to support it so that you could teach it next to evolution in the public schools. But intelligent design really just focused on the design argument that there are things that are just too complicated. Structural things, like it used to be in the 19th century, used to be the vertebrate eye. That was the thing they'd point to. But now they'll point to the bacterial flagellum or some other complicated molecular or cellular structure. And because these are so complicated, they are irreducibly complex. They could not be explained by the step-by-step process of evolution by natural selection. So therefore, evolution didn't take place, and it's a absolutely unscientific explanation. There's lots of books about why intelligent design fails as science, but it is on the surface. If you don't know very much science, it sounds, oh, wow, that's a really profound explanation, particularly when they dress it up with information theory, which makes it sound very modern and very cutting edge, and not like just, talking snakes. I mean, this is much more sophisticated than that. But ultimately, when you have intelligent design, you have an intelligent designer. That was a mistake they made in choosing that phrase to describe their position. Once you have an intelligent designer, who are you talking about?
Yeah, right.
And remember Michael
The
Behe was,
watchmaker.
yeah, yep. But Michael Behe in the Kitzmiller trial, I think maybe you might even use this in your boiling down. Um, he reflected on, well, we're not saying it has to be God. It could be a time traveling biochemist from the future. Right. No, it isn't. It's God. That's what they're talking about. They just have
Right.
to kind of brush God under the rug, because if they say it's God, then you run into the First Amendment, which says that public institutions like schools have to be religiously neutral. And religious neutrality does not mean we teach your religion as fact. That is not being neutral. And so that's why all the creationist bills, and ultimately Kitzmiller versus Dover intelligent design trial, all of those positions were struck down by the courts based on the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment.
Well, let's hope that that continues.
I'm very, very much hoping that that I'm dead wrong. Because I think that that there is the potential for the creationism issue to bubble up again in probably its intelligent design form, because of a Supreme Court decision in 2022, Kennedy versus Bremerton, in which the precedent that has been used in Kitzmiller and all the other creation and evolution trials, the precedent that has been used to decide whether an act, a law, violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, was struck down. And so now we don't have, it was Lemon versus Kurtzman. Now we don't have the Lemon decision to say, hey, you're violating Lemon, make that policy go away. I'm really, really hoping that my Cassandra is gone. And my Cassandra influences are wrong. You know something? I've enjoyed talking to you, but now I feel very guilty because there are lots of people, I am sure, wanting to ask you questions, and I am monopolizing your company here. Here's one from a man named Craig Evans, who says, as a resident of Pennsylvania, I have had a fascination with the Kitzmiller trial since it occurred. What have been the most dramatic changes in the ID creationist playbook in the past 20 years?
Well, I can't answer that, but you can.
Well, I will try to answer it very quickly. A major approach has been to abandon trying to get intelligent design into the public schools. There had already been an effort to get creation science into the public schools. It was struck down by the Supreme Court. Intelligent design was struck down in Kitzmiller, and they were beaten so badly they didn't even try any longer. What the anti-evolution movement shifted to, Craig, at that point, is trying to argue that rather than teaching some form of some form of intelligent design or creation of to balance out evolution, you teach evolution, but then you teach the arguments against evolution. And I assure you, the arguments against evolution are very mystifying to any scientist because we don't know of any. And if you ask them, well, what exactly should a teacher teach? It's things like the flagellum is incredibly complex. It couldn't possibly be produced. It's what they used to call intelligent design. So the good news is there's some survey research. If you go to ncse.ngo and you search for creationism polls, you'll find some survey research that shows that, encouragingly, the acceptance of evolution has increased substantially in the last 20 years in the population as a whole, and largely because of the establishment of state science education standards, which are specific to each state, but they almost all universally include the teaching of evolution. So textbooks are better, the instruction in evolution is better. William Patterson says, did a love for science steer you towards Star Trek, or was it the other way around?
I always had a love for science, and maybe it came. I was a kid who had difficulty reading, learning how to read. I was taught a new way to read, and it was not successful. They didn't do it after a while. And so my first book which I read from cover to cover, was Jules Verne's Mysterious Island. And
Really?
and I so
Mm.
wanted to be like those people. I was so enamored of the fact that they could look at a hill or a little some dirt over there and go, there's iron in that hill, which means the iron ore in there, which means we can smelt that and we can make tools, or we can turn this stream of water into we'll make paddles and we'll create energy, and we'll be able to make a mill. And so I just thought that was the greatest thing that I had ever heard, and I just wanted desperately to be like them. So if you look back on who wrote that, Jules Verne, where science and industry, and I think industry in this case means working hard, was going to make a better world. I was on board at the age of about 11.
For you. Um, I'm looking at the questions and I'm hoping that I didn't click something that I shouldn't have clicked and missed a question. Oh, there we go. How much of your love of science was in your portrayal of Janos Martok in the unfortunately short-lived Legend series on UPN?
Oh, I loved that series. Ricky Dean Anderson and I and the people who wrote it and what have you, we really loved that series. And the fact that they actually created the I forget what's the name now, with the static electricity and what have you, all of it was great. It was just great. I mean, and a bittersweet moment that I will never forget, very bittersweet moment, since you brought up the fact that it was short-lived. We worked really hard. We worked very long hours, 14, 16 hours often. And um, they had created a cave, and I was inside a cave, and I was watching as the set decorators were making it all work. And there were some boxes that had the Los Angeles History Museum stamped on them, and they were assembling a dinosaur. And I was just watching them do it. I mean, it was just sitting there for an hour, just watching them do it. They were shooting something else somewhere else, and I was just thinking, this is the reason I became an actor. This is that sort of boys' literature, that the dinosaurs and the cave, and I mean, and I was involved, and there was a tap on my shoulder, and it was the producer, and he said, "Hey, John, I was looking for you." And I said, "Oh, Mike, isn't this fabulous? I mean, look at this. Isn't this fabulous?" And he said, "Well, yeah, it's great, but I have some bad news. We've been canceled."
Oh, what?
Oh God,
Oh, breaking your heart.
I know, I know.
Uh, yes, well, our hearts go out to you and ourselves for not having more
Yeah,
of the
it was,
program.
yeah.
Was Q a version of a Leonard asks you, was Q a version of a god in another galaxy? You seem to have so much fun with that role.
I don't know. The short answer is this: is that Gene Roddenberry wanted to go immediately to episodic television, and the studios or the network, whoever it was, wanted to have an MOW, a movie of the week. And he hemmed and hawed about it, and finally acquiesced and expanded the episode that he had, and added, I guess, another 42 minutes, which included my character. I think it was done quickly, and I think that in the process of doing it, he must have gone back in his mind many years and gone, what really worked in the first iteration of Star Trek. And one of those characters was a character named Trelane. it's sort of a child god, you know, or a god that behaved like a child. And so that I believe is the best explanation for the character of Q. I did not know the show well enough to ask him any of those questions. When Gene and I had lunch twice, and we talked about airplanes. You know, we just talked about airplanes. I was writing a show about a Peyton Pole air camper that a bunch of kids had put together, and they, you know, blah 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 blah. So we talked about airplanes, and I didn't know about the character of Trelane at all. It wasn't until a number of years later that somebody pointed it out to me. And I was playing at the time Raoul Amundsen, who was a very powerful, uh, you know, no nonsense sort of guy. And so I think all of that kind of helped create this thing called Q.
The classic trickster character.
Yeah.
Um, well, guess who's just chimed in? My very good friend and someone whom you admire, Ken Miller, who writes, in preparing to write your radio play, did you watch the Nova program Judgment Day? If so, how well did it capture the sense of the trial, in your opinion? Did you
Um,
see the Nova Judgment Day?
yes, yes. Well, first of all, I have to say I've read everything that you wrote in that said in that trial. We Kristen and I love you. I wish I could do just a whole show about just the things that you said. Um,
Talking to you, Ken. He's talking to you.
what's that?
I was just pointing out to Ken that he's talking to you. Yes.
Yeah. I did watch Judgment Day. And one of the things, I mean, it was interesting. I thought it was very well done, and on and on and on. But and it's been a long time now, but one of the things that struck me was how indecipherable, in a way, was the testimony, was Behe's testimony. And I was kind of going, what are we going to do with this? Because in the end, it's just kind of all nonsense. And we in the show that we wrote, we are already almost two-thirds of the way to the end, and you don't want to, you know, it's the horse wants to go back to the barn door, and you don't want to to bog down the show or the audience. And when we did it just when I did the show just, you know, 2 weeks ago in Vanderbilt, one of the teachers, scientists, said, "Gee, I wish you had included more of Behe." And I said, "Yes, but it's so," and he goes, "No, I know it's just gonna like that." And I said, "Yes, I will take what you have in mind. I will take that suggestion and look at it. I'm just concerned that the audience is going to get it really quickly, and they're going to kind of we're going to lose them, and I don't want to lose the audience at that, you know, two-third mark."
Yeah, constructing a drama is very different from participating in a trial. The goals are very different. And
Right.
you edited a
Right.
lot because scientists do go on the witness stand. Giacomo Valentini asks, do you have suggestions on how to improve science education in media shows? Have you thought about how the media, how your profession could do a better job?
Well, I mean, it's always the same thing. Is that in my estimation, the facts are oftentimes far more interesting than the uh, fabrication or the fiction is. So, and also it gives parameters to the story, and sometimes I think that that's really important. So I tend to not watch things where I kind of go, "Oh, that's just completely unbelievable. I just I can't." You know, it doesn't attract me. But understand, I'm only doing something very very small, very very
Yeah.
small, And people ask, I was in a conversation a couple of days ago about, well, why don't you make a movie? And I go, no, you don't understand. Movies take years to put together.
And they're
Just
very expensive.
they're very expensive, and by the who knows by the end if it's even close to what you had in mind. And there's so many people involved, and on and on and on. I'm interested in this case a message. I'm interested in the message. Now, um, Eugenie, could get up and talk about this. Ken Miller could get up and talk about this. I'm not as educated and as I don't know the subject in the same way that you do, but I can create a show which touches on this,
Yes,
which touches, on some of the high points, and then all of this could be filled in by the audience later or by experts like yourself. So that's what I do, and that in this case, I wanted to do it about this subject, which the Scopes trial and now the Dover trial are subjects that I think are really interesting. This is almost a protest show.
mm,
Um, it's not a play, with character arcs and conflicts in that respect. It is in many ways an audio documentary. This is something you need to know about. And let me take 40 days of a trial, not to mention the depositions beforehand. Ay, ay, ay. Um, um, and try to bring it down enough for you to understand it, appreciate what's going on, and if you're really interested, there are books. There's more information out there.
indeed, indeed. And the bottom line is maybe we're expecting too much of popular entertainment. It's the purpose of what you do is to entertain. The degree that you can also inform and teach is fine, but the bottom line is it has to first be entertaining. Nobody really wants a lecture on the bacterial flagellum. I mean, you,
Exactly, but one
yeah,
one does the I don't know if you call this entertaining, but the audience, when we get to Buckingham's testimony, and when we get to
yeah,
Bonzell's testimony, you are seeing human beings under the microscope, under
yes,
stress,
yes,
uh, and that the audience is as somebody said to me um, from at the last show. They said you could hear a pin drop. People are following it. They are just really following, and it's like follow the bouncing ball. It starts out with two guys looking into a classroom at that painting that you referred to, and one person saying to the other that somebody ought to get rid of that. And there we start.
mhm.
Yeah,
And it's the human drama that makes it engaging.
right.
And there are many concomitants and many uh, spin-offs and important elements to our culture as a result of what went on in the play, sorry, in the trial. But what makes it really engaging is that human element. Um,
Something that you might not for the audience is that every year, those of us on Star Trek are asked. Some of us are asked to do a cruise. And when we first were asked to do this, we were thought, "Oh my gosh, what in the world is that going to be like?" And then we were asked to bring something. So people would bring a song or what have you. And I thought about it, and I went, "Huh, there are 3,000 people on this cruise." Yeah. Well, they aren't going anywhere, are they? No.
be a captive audience.
I, I think I'm going to go do the Scopes monkey trial. Uh, and then, as I sort of alluded to, at the end of that, I said, to the audience, 1,500 at a time. I said, did you enjoy this? Was this not only entertaining but interesting?
Mhm.
And Star Trek audiences, for the most part, are really bright people.
Yeah.
And they said yes, 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 absolutely. I said, well, next year I'm going to do the Dover Intelligent Design Trial, and
There you
that's
go.
when Kristen Treager who was in the audience, walked up and said, "Do you need any help?" So I know that these shows um, work at a couple of different levels,
Right.
and it's human drama. It's human drama, as well as what are we teaching, and do we
Mhm.
really want to be teaching kids bad ideas that don't work, that aren't about the real world? I mean, do we really want to do that? But it's also about human drama.
Yes. And we are human, we are social primates, and we're concerned about things like that. Glenn Branch, who is the deputy director of NCSE, asks, are there any plans to publish the play script? A number of people have asked at NCSE.
What I would like to do is essentially raise the money to do this with a really tip-top cast as an audio, and then to simply give it away. Just give it away. Not to organizations that want it, they can give it away. I want as many people to sit down and listen to it as possible. But these things, you have to get recording studios. And in my case, you have to get, I really want Kate Mulgrew I think, did one of the readings on the boat. I want Kate to be the narrator there. My wife, Marnie Moseman, was the narrator in another. And I have to bring all these people together, and some of them are in Los Angeles, but some of them are around the world. And so you have to get the studio in New York, or you have to get the studio in Vancouver, or you just. So now it's two studios at the same time. So there are just a lot of technical things attached to it.
And Engler, who is another skeptic, wants to know, do you know of any use of the idea of these dramatizations, radio plays and so forth, to help with public awareness of climate change and better acceptance of that issue? I know your thing is
Uh,
evolution, thank you, but do you know of
Yeah,
any
that's right.
efforts?
I can tell you, I mean, it's very simple for me. I mean, I've done a lot of these shows. I used to direct a lot of them. I was in a lot of them with LA Theater Works and what have you. I think
Mhm.
I think they're a terrific um, uh, uh, way of presenting a show. They're a terrific way of presenting the show. You mentioned Leonard Nimoy. Leonard and I created a show for the superintendents of schools for California, where now I grew up in a little. I flunked a lot of schools and ended up in a little tiny school where my entire class for that year was 19 kids. So I had this idea that really, in a way, doesn't work anymore. But this was the idea that I used to create the shows that we did for Alien Voices. A teacher, a science teacher, is in his class and is teaching the physics of flight. Goes to the English teacher and says, it would be great if your students could write something on this subject. Who then, the English teacher, goes to the theater teacher and says, can you put this on? This script. So
Mhm.
there's a connection there. And
Mhm. I like that.
we were able to do that in this little school that we had.
That's very
So
cool.
everybody would be involved, and everybody would learn. That's one of the wonderful things about being an actor, and that is that as an actor, you become sort of a generalist and you become, I mentioned Raoul Amundsen. Well, I was so enamored of that character that I read everything about Raoul Amundsen. Well, that took me to, in my mind, to Greenland, to Norway, to Canada, to other explorers at the time, and I just began to know the subject matter.
Yeah.
Well, in the same way that in this little show that we created, you learn all about the Wright brothers, and you learn about, I forget who their names are. It's been so many years. The guys in France who were doing the same thing, and you just learn a lot. And so I love that type of
Mhm.
of learning. I love
Of
that.
education, of
Of it.
education.
Right.
Yeah. Speaking of education, Diane Blackwood and another questioner whose name seems to have disappeared right here, um, asked a similar question that if the script were made available, then potentially high school students or college students could, or little theater could present it. At
The
some point in
answer,
the future, is that a
yes.
possibility?
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. We just have to. We're still. Every show goes through a maturation period. When I did this for the cruise, I only had about 3 hours to put it together, but I was working for the most part with professionals.
Yeah.
Then when I did it in Sacramento, I had 2 nights to put it together, so that was maybe about 5 hours. When I just did it here at Vanderbilt, I had I think 9 to 10 hours. And what does that mean? It means that I'm not simply going, go to mic 3, go to mic 7, go to mic, but no, like that. This is the scene. Okay, let's keep going. I'm going, okay, let me listen to that again. Are there any problems that you, the cast, are having in terms of following who's saying what and stuff like that? Oh, so that name should be repeated. Okay, let me put that into your
Mhm.
script. So the work
You're
that comes
tinkering.
with that, the
You're
work that
tinkering
comes with that's
naturally.
right. So
Yeah.
there will come a day that we have to say it stops. But that scientist who suggested it at Vanderbilt, gee, I think you should try to include more of what Behe says. We need to look at that. We just need to look at that and to see what that really means. I mean, how much does the audience need to know about the flagellum only to discover that it's just it doesn't make any
It,
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 it
it
doesn't
does,
make any,
it's not a good argument anyway.
it's not a good argument anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we need to come to a close. We've gone over our time, although I don't think anybody's going to complain. Let me ask you, what are you doing next? What's next on your agenda for creative?
Well, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be in Rochester with the Rochester Symphony Orchestra there. I'm going to be doing a uh, a composition based on Dr. Seuss's The Sneetches. And it's a wonderful thing, the whole notion of some of the Sneetches have stars on their bellies and others don't.
Star-bellied
That's
sneetches have
right.
bellies with stars.
And I think it's important, even though we seem to have inexplicably. I read a piece. I was in Naples, Florida, a month or so ago, and for a concert there. And I felt it was necessary, and thankfully, Jack Everly, who was the conductor, said, "Yes, please do read this." I read a speech that Gene Roddenberry wrote in 1971, saying, "Man will gain wisdom, and once he realizes uh, that diversity, in life and in ideas is important." So, we seem to be under attack right now with the idea. I mean, whoever thought that saying that you were for equity? I want things to be equal. I think that that's good. There should be equity. is
Yeah.
not a good thing anymore. I mean, it's out of fashion. So to do something like the Sneetches, I'm delighted to do those type of things.
If you don't know the story of it's a children's story that emphasizes the importance of tolerance. It's a very important children's book. Everybody should read it. Well, we're going to have to close.
Yes.
There is one last comment here. Ruth, excuse me, Dreidger says, "Happy birthday to John." Is this your birthday?
Oh, it is my birthday.
Well,
Yeah.
happy birthday to you. We will
Thank you.
all sing happy birthday, but I'd be the only one you could hear, and you don't want to hear me sing. John, thank you very, very much for being our guest on Skeptical on the show.
Yes,
Skeptical
and
Inquirer
also
presents.
people should come. I hope that they come to Chattanooga.
Yes, indeedy.
I
Just
think
to
that
reiterate, July
July.
18th through the 20th in Chattanooga, Tennessee. You can get your tickets at the CSI website. And it's also there's a link in the chat notes for this program. Don't miss it. I'll be there. I've got too many friends on that list of speakers to not go, so I'm going to go too. See you then,
It's
John.
going to be very exciting. Yeah.
Thank all of you for coming, and see you 2 weeks from now. Good night. And this is me, isn't it?